This is Talking Foreign Policy, a critical look at Canada's role abroad, and I'm Eve Engler. Today we're going to talk about this report that was on the front page of Monday's Globe and Mail, and that Irwin Cotler stated himself, which is that Iran is trying to assassinate him. Cotler being Canada's most prominent pro-Israel activist over the past half century or so. And yesterday, Monday, in the House of Commons, the Parliament unanimously endorsed a resolution that described Kotler as his contribution, quote, contribution to the defense of human rights. So that was unanimously backed in the House of Commons. Now, of course, Kotler, over the past 13 months, as Israel's committed a Holocaust in Gaza, he's attended multiple rallies supporting Israel. He's written, spoken, defending Israel. In 2022, he was, while he was the special envoy on combating anti-Semitism, he was set to be the keynote speaker at Ariel University, which is deep in the West Bank, a very controversial university. Only pulled out after there was a big backlash to that. In 2020, he pressured the International Criminal Court to not investigate Israel's war crimes, Israeli officials' war crimes. He also pushed the International Court of Justice to not fulfill the mandate given to it by the General Assembly to investigate or to advise on states' responsibilities vis-a-vis Israel's illegal occupation. So to discuss Irwin Cotler and this whole issue, we have a prominent Canadian activist, journalist, lawyer, Dimitri Lascaris. Thanks a lot for coming on to Talking Foreign Policy. So what's your response to the House of Commons praising Kotler's defense of human rights?
You know, Irwin Cotler is a shameless apologist for Israel's apartheid and genocide. He has made this absolutely clear. He whitewashes Israel's crimes systematically. He never actually condemns their settlements. Let's take the example of the settlements. Okay, Eve. These are, by the Canadian government's own admission, a grave violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Irwin Cotler was the Justice Minister of Canada in a Liberal government at a time when the government was recognizing the blatant illegality of the settlements. What did he do? Did he do anything to hold Israel accountable? Did he impose any sanctions? Did he even criticize Israel's settlements? No, he did nothing. This man has postured as a crusader against Russia's violations of international law. Well, the violations of international law by Israel, by any rational measure, are far worse than those of Russia. If you look at, for example, the number of civilians that the Israelis have killed in about a year in Gaza, it's, 3, 4, maybe even 10 times as big as the number of civilians that have been killed in Ukraine on both sides, the Russian and the Ukrainian side, in 2.5 years. Has Irwin Cotler said boo about this? Has he argued the way he has with respect to Russia for Magnitsky sanctions on Israel? No. So to call this man a defender of human rights, a human rights crusader, is an insult to the intelligence of Canadians and is frankly an insult to the human rights community, where people are actually risking their lives in a genuine attempt to protect human rights.
Yeah, he's a very active advocate of Israel. I know a few years ago, maybe 2018, 2019, we were at a protest against the Jewish National Fund of Canada fundraiser here in Montreal, and Kotler showed up. And of course, the JNF has recently lost its charitable status because of its support for the Israeli military, because it's a racist organization. And Kotler was like attending a fundraising session for that. So let alone bringing in Magnitsky sanctions. Also, of course, Kotler's wife it was a top advisor to Likud founder Mehin Begin. So he has been deeply involved in promoting Israel for 40, 50 plus years. Now, the other side to this, in part, is this question of these allegations. This was a story about Iran planning to assassinate Cotler, alleged plan to assassinate Cotler, was picked up by the BBC, Agence France Presse, Australia Broadcasting Corporation. The Iranians' response, spokesperson said it's, quote, ridiculous propaganda stunt. What's your kind of assessment of this claim? Does this, how do you see this, and what do you think it fits into?
Well, do I think that Iran's government is capable of killing its political opponents abroad? Yeah, it probably is. I wouldn't be shocked if the Iranian government actually has done that or attempted to do it in this case. But I don't assume it's true just because the Globe and Mail says so or because some unnamed source says so, which is precisely what's happened here, especially at a time when Western governments are looking to build public support for a war in Iran. We've been heading in the direction of a full-blown war in Iran for over a year, which has nothing to do whatsoever with human rights in Iran or the rights of women or any other group. It's all about the fact that Iran refuses to be an obedient vassal of the American government in West Asia, the way Jordan is, the way Egypt's brutal dictator is, the way, to a large degree, the Saudi crown prince is, and other autocrats in the region. They want to turn Iran into that kind of a state. They don't care about human rights in Iran. And it's very clear that they're ratcheting up the military pressure on Iran, and we're heading towards a war. That was true long before Trump got elected. I've been arguing this for over a year. So in that environment, if we are interested in peace, we should take unsourced, unsubstantiated claims against the Iranian government with a substantial grain of salt, use our critical thinking, and be suitably skeptical, not because we're, defenders of the Iranian government, but because we don't want war. We want to avoid war to the maximum degree possible. And we know from experience that Canadian intelligence agencies, Western intelligence agencies lie shamelessly in order to build public support for war, just as they did in the case of Iraq. The intelligence agencies in the United States lied through their teeth that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and that he was involved in some way in the 9/11 attacks. We now know that that was absolutely false, and they used that to build a public frenzy in the United States in the aftermath of 9/11 for a war on Iraq. And we all know how that played out, and that it turned out to be a criminal war of aggression. I think they're doing it again, Eve. This character, Robert Fife, at the Globe and Mail, who I think is the guy, he's the primary so-called journalist who broke this story. Okay, Robert Fife and another guy from the Globe and Mail, Stephen Chase, last year, as I think you have talked about this, they were awarded the Ross Munro Award by the Canadian Defense Associates. This is basically an industry association of merchants of death. Okay, these people, these are arms industry contractors who have developed this lobbying group, and they gave these guys, they singled these people out for an award for so-called journalism. Robert Fife is a mouthpiece of the military-industrial complex. His entire career has demonstrated that. So he publishes a story. He says a source, doesn't tell us anything about the source, nothing, has said that there was an attempt by Iran or a plan to assassinate Irwin Cotler. And then he said, the source, according to Fife, tells him it's unknown whether the two suspects who were associated with this conspiracy have been arrested or have fled the country. So there's no way to actually consult them. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. We don't even know if they exist, which is very convenient for this whole narrative. How are we supposed to test whether this thing is true or false? And then he says in his article, Fife, they reached out to the RCMP, and the RCMP did not confirm the story, didn't respond to a request for confirmation. And even if the RCMP had, the RCMP could be lying. It's lied before, and it's perfectly capable of lying again. So there's nothing to support this story, absolutely nothing to support this story. And the other thing I want to say is just the implausibility of all of this. I know that Irwin Cotler thinks that he's, the greatest human rights thing since sliced bread. And I know that the Canadian establishment, just as they did in Canada's parliament, love to stroke this man's gigantic ego. But Irwin Cotler, outside of of Canada and Israel, is a nobody. Nobody cares about Irwin Cotler. Irwin Cotler was a liberal hack politician who served as justice minister in a hack government of liberals about 20 years ago. And ever since then, the man has been lying about his record, claiming that I was Nelson Mandela's lawyer and I was this guy's lawyer, when people close to Nelson Mandela, vigorously contest that he ever represented Nelson Mandela. The man is nothing but a con artist and an apologist, as we talked about, for an apartheid regime, there's really no reason for the Iranians, whatever you may think about their government, to be focused on killing him, this pipsqueak, when they have to deal with the possibility of an annihilation, a full-blown war by the United States and Israel and Britain and other Western governments against their own people. This is like the least of their concerns right now. Frankly, I find the whole story to be implausible in the extreme. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. I don't know whether it's true. I just have serious doubts about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the other part that we need to connect this to a little bit is the stories coming out of the States. And in the US, there's this whole claim that Iran is trying to assassinate Trump. And one of the reports I saw said they had a plan to assassinate him if he won, and they had a plan to assassinate him if he lost, which to me is very odd. Why would they want to assassinate him if he lost? And the same thing kind of goes with Irwin Cotler in that Cotler actually, when this supposedly began, Cotler actually no longer had a formal position. He's 84 years old. He seems, when you see him, it looks quite frail. So to me, it seems kind of highly unlikely. He's somebody who may die, soonish. It seems very highly unlikely that if there was ever a time that Iran thought about assassinating Cotler, this would be kind of the less likely of those times. But yeah, can you maybe just talk a little bit about the U.S. stuff? And apparently the story is that this somehow comes from the FBI. One of the Globe, they mentioned that this sort of FBI that passed it on to Canadians. And the other thing I just want to mention is that Robert Fife, of course, was mentioned. He was sort of basically targeted for his reporting on Maharar, his role in enabling being a tool of CSIS and intelligence agencies for the imprisonment of Maharar. So he's somebody who while he still has lots of standing among the establishment, he has very formally been shown to be quick to be the mouthpiece of the intelligence agencies. But yeah, so a little bit about the U.S. Allegations around Trump and Iran assassinating him.
Yeah, so again, timing tells us a great deal. Is it a coincidence that within days of the US making these allegations that Iran tried to assassinate Trump, Robert Fife spews out this unsubstantiated story about Iran wanting to kill this pipsqueak, Irwin Cotler? Are we really to believe it's coincidence? No, there's coordination going on here. That's exactly what's going on. It's all part of an orchestrated campaign to get people riled up in the United States and Canada about Iran. This story in the United States seems to be based upon the claims, the unsworn claims of some, illegal immigrant who was in U.S. prisons for a number of years. I think it was in excess of 10 years. And finally, when he got freed, he wanted to get one of his buddies out of jail. And the New York Times acknowledged, or it was the Washington Post, one of these newspapers who broke this story, that when he gave this account, these claims to the FBI or whatever other law enforcement agency he was dealing with in the United States, he was trying to get his buddy out of jail. So he's not giving testimony under oath. He's not in the IC. He could say anything. I mean, it's nothing. This has zero evidentiary value, in my opinion. And he also was using racist language about Black persons. As you pointed out before we got on this call, Michael Tracy has published a transcript of this guy's testimony. He's a racist. He's a criminal. He was deported from the United States. He had a motive to lie. So there's absolutely no reason to believe that this guy is telling the truth. Maybe he is, but his statements, in my opinion, have zero evidentiary value. Get him in a court of law, give him in the United States to swearing under oath that he's telling the truth, and allow somebody, a defense lawyer, to cross-examine him. Then we can judge whether this guy's telling the truth. The fact of the matter is, again, that the United States intelligence agencies have a long history of fabricating stories like this and using a compliant corporate media to spread them in order to build public support for devastating wars. And I believe that that is a much more plausible explanation for what is going on here, both in the United States and Canada, than the idea that Iran is, when it's on the verge of a devastating war with the United States, Israel, and other Western countries, that it's bothering itself to try to assassinate these people here. And the other thing I want to say is I find it much more believable that the CIA or elements within the US national security state tried to assassinate Trump than that Iran tried to do it. These people have been openly declaring Trump to be Hitler, a threat to US democracy, to the national security of the United States. They have been openly talking about him as though he's an existential threat to everything that Americans hold dear. They are perfectly capable of killing their own politicians, the US intelligence agencies. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but I think that's exactly what happened in the case of JFK. I think the most likely explanation is that elements within the national security state, as most Americans believe, by the way, according to polls, are responsible for the killing of JFK. Do I find that a more plausible account of what happened to Trump, who almost got his head blown off? Yeah, I do. Absolutely. One thing's for sure, I'm not going to believe anything they have to say about these assassination plots until I see credible evidence to support them.
And it should be noted that John Ratcliffe, who's apparently Trump's pick for the director of CIA, he has explicitly referenced this Iran alleged threat against Trump as, quote, an act of war against the U.S. and saying that the U.S. needs to, go to war with Iran because of this act of war. And so variations of that we will probably see from Canadian officials vis-a-vis the Cotler allegations. Thanks a lot for coming on, talking foreign policy, Dimitri.
Thank you, Eve. Good to talk to you.